Welcome to Holme Horror. I've been waiting for you. Painted Grin. The circus rolled into town under a sky choked with thunderclouds. Vibrant red and gold banners flapped defiantly against the gloomy backdrop, promising a night of wonder and delight. Townsfolk gathered in clusters near the parking lot turned fairground, watching as performers erected tents, tested lights, and set up booths that smelled faintly of fried dough and fresh popcorn. Maggie Brooks stood on the edge of the scene, clutching her bike handles as her little brother Jake tugged impatiently at her sleeve. "Come on, Mags. Let's check it out before it opens." Jake's face was alight with excitement. "I don't know," Maggie said, shifting uncomfortably. Something about the circus didn't sit right with her. Maybe it was the way the workers moved too fast, their faces blank as masks. Or maybe it was the circus's main attraction, the painted image of a grinning clown named Jester, plastered across every tent and banner. Jester's exaggerated red smile seemed more like a wound than an invitation. "Please," Jake begged, his eyes wide. Maggie sighed. "Fine, but only for a few minutes." The siblings wheeled closer, weaving through the chaotic setup. As they passed a side tent, Maggie heard muffled laughter, sharp and shrill, that made her shiver. By nightfall, the circus had transformed into a glowing wonderland. Strings of lights crisscrossed the fairground, and the air buzzed with the sound of music, laughter, and distant cheers. The centerpiece was the big top tent, its striped canopy stretching high into the stormy sky. Maggie and Jake arrived just in time for the main event. They settled into seats near the back of the packed crowd as the ringmaster, a wiry man in a black suit, stepped into the spotlight. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls," he bellowed, "prepare to be amazed, astounded, and utterly enchanted. I present to you, Jester the Great." The spotlight swung to the center of the ring, where Jester appeared in a puff of smoke. His costume was a chaotic blend of colors, patched and frayed, but his painted face was pristine. The wide red grin split his pale face in two, and his bright blue eyes sparkled with mischief. "Hello, my friends." Jester's voice was musical, rising and falling in playful cadences. He juggled knives, balanced on stilts, and pulled endless scarves from his sleeves. The crowd roared with laughter and applause. But as the show went on, Maggie noticed something odd. The young boy in the front row vanished during a balloon animal act. Another child disappeared during a card trick, right before the cards exploded into confetti. Each time, Jester brushed it off with a joke or a clever misdirection, and the audience barely noticed. Maggie, however, couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something was terribly wrong. When the show ended, Jake was beaming. "That was awesome. Can we come back tomorrow?" Maggie's stomach churned. "We'll see." The next morning, the town was abuzz with excitement about the circus. But Maggie's unease deepened when she overheard her neighbors whispering about missing children. 2 boys from her street hadn't come home after the show, and their parents were frantic. Maggie tried to talk to Jake, but he shrugged her off. "You're just jealous you didn't have fun," he said, heading out to meet his friends. Determined to get answers, Maggie returned to the circus grounds alone. In the harsh light of day, the magic was gone. The colorful tents looked faded and tattered, and the smell of popcorn was overwhelmed by a sickly sweet odor she couldn't place. She approached the big top cautiously, peeking inside. The ring was empty, but Jester's trailer stood just behind the tent, its door slightly ajar. Maggie hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, but she couldn't shake the image of the missing kids. Taking a deep breath, she crept toward the trailer. Inside, the air was stifling and thick with the stench of decay. The walls were lined with shelves of props, painted masks, oversized shoes, and balloons in every color. But the balloons weren't made of rubber. Their translucent surface pulsed faintly, as if alive. Maggie's heart pounded as she stepped further in. At the back of the trailer was a small door. She pushed it open, revealing a hidden compartment. What she saw made her stomach lurch. Hanging from the ceiling were dozens of children, their bodies limp and pale. They were wrapped in a strange web-like substance, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. In the center of the room stood Jester, his back to her. He was humming softly, his hands working on something Maggie couldn't see. She took a step back, but the floor creaked beneath her weight. Jester turned. His painted grin widened unnaturally, stretching across his face. His eyes glowed with a sickly yellow light, and his mouth opened to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. "Well, well," he purred. "A curious little mouse has wandered into my den." Maggie stumbled backward, her mind racing. She had to get out, had to warn the others. "Don't leave yet," Jester cooed, taking a step toward her. "The fun's just begun." Maggie bolted for the door, but Jester was fast, inhumanly fast. He lunged, his clawed hand swiping inches from her face. She grabbed a heavy prop from a nearby shelf and hurled it at him. It struck his chest, sending him staggering back. She didn't wait to see if he recovered. She sprinted out of the trailer and into the daylight, her legs pumping as adrenaline coursed through her veins. But the circus workers were waiting, their blank faces twisted into grotesque smiles as they closed in, blocking her path. "Help!" Maggie screamed. But her voice was swallowed by the carnival music blaring from unseen speakers. The workers grabbed her, dragging her back toward the big top. She fought with everything she had, kicking and clawing, but their grip was unrelenting. They threw her into the ring where Jester was waiting. His grin was gone, replaced by a look of cold fury. "You've seen too much," he said, his voice low and menacing. "What are you?" Maggie demanded, her voice trembling. Jester tilted his head, his painted features shifting grotesquely. "I'm the laughter that hides in the dark, the grin that never fades, and now you'll join my collection." He raised his hands and the children's bodies were lowered into the ring, taut, their webbing unraveling. But they weren't dead. Their eyes snapped open, glowing with the same sickly light as Jester's. They moved jerkily, like puppets on invisible strings. Maggie screamed as they surrounded her, their cold hands gripping her arms and legs. "You'll be my masterpiece," Jester whispered. When Maggie didn't return home, her parents reported her missing. The police searched the circus grounds, but by then, it was gone, vanished as if it had never been there. The only thing left behind was a torn circus poster, its edges fluttering in the breeze. The next town over, Grinwell's Circus of Whimsy set up its tents. A new banner hung outside the big top, featuring Jester and his troupe of performers. At the center of the group was a young girl with haunting blue eyes and a painted smile that never faded. Balloon Rim. The Pennywig Circus grounds were a graveyard of rusted rides and collapsing tents, buried under decades of weeds and graffiti. Everyone in town knew the story. In 1974, the circus shut down overnight after a catastrophic fire. People whispered that it was arson, set by the vengeful spirit of Chuckles, a clown who had died in the blaze. Some said Chuckles had been framed for a crime he didn't commit and had vowed revenge against anyone who dared tread on his sacred stage. Others claimed he'd been a monster in life, and his spirit haunted the grounds, waiting for new victims. None of that mattered to Sam, Chloe, Ryan, and Tasha as they stood outside the rusted gates on a moonless night. "This is so stupid," Chloe muttered, hugging her hoodie tightly around herself. "We're gonna get tetanus just breathing here." "Scared already?" Ryan teased, nudging her with his flashlight. "It's just an old circus," Sam said. His voice was calm, but his grip on the gate suggested otherwise. Tasha, ever the bravest, climbed over the gate first. "Come on, losers," she said with a grin. "Chuckles is waiting." The others followed, their laughter echoing through the night. But as soon as their feet hit the overgrown path on the other side, the air grew colder, the shadows darker. "Let's find the big top," Tasha said, leading the way. The main tent was a tattered skeleton of its former glory. The striped fabric hung in shreds, swaying in the breeze. Inside, the bleachers were rotted and collapsing, and the ring in the center was overgrown with weeds. Ryan shone his flashlight across the space. "Creepy, but not that creepy." "Give it a minute," Chloe said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sam's flashlight flickered, and he smacked it against his palm. "Cheap piece of..." Suddenly, a sound cut through the silence, the faint squeak of a balloon being inflated. Everyone froze. "Did you hear that?" Tasha whispered. Probably just the wind, Ryan said, but his bravado faltered. The sound came again, louder this time. A high-pitched, rubbery squeak, like someone twisting a balloon into shape. Chloe pointed her flashlight toward the back of the tent, where a doorway led to the performers' area. "Let's check it out." "Nope," Sam said immediately. "Come on, we didn't come all this way to chicken out," Tasha said, already heading for the door. The others followed reluctantly, their footsteps crunching on the debris-strewn floor. Beyond the doorway was a narrow corridor, lined with peeling posters of clowns and acrobats. The squeaking sound grew louder as they approached the last door on the left. Tasha pushed it open, revealing a room filled with balloons. Hundreds of them floated in the dim space, their vibrant colors a sharp contrast to the decay around them. They were tied to strings that hung from the ceiling like streamers, swaying gently despite the still air. "Okay, this is officially weird," Chloe said. "Where are these even coming from?" Sam asked, touching one. It bobbed slightly but didn't pop. Ryan grinned. "Maybe Chuckles is throwing us a party." "Don't joke about that," Chloe snapped. Tasha picked up a pair of scissors from a nearby table. "Let's see what happens." Before anyone could stop her, she snipped one of the strings. The balloon floated to the ground and popped with a sharp bang. From the spot where it landed, a pool of blood began to spread. "What the hell?" Sam yelled, stumbling backward. "It's a trick," Ryan said, though his voice was shaky. But then the blood began to bubble, and a hand burst out of the floor. It was pale and clawed, dragging the rest of a mutilated body with it. The thing looked like a person, but its face was twisted into a grotesque smile, and its eyes glowed faintly red. "What did you do?" Chloe screamed at Tasha. The creature lunged, and the group scattered, knocking over chairs and balloons in their panic. As they fled, more balloons popped, each one releasing another grotesque figure. Some crawled out of the ground, while others seemed to materialize out of the air. They all shared the same horrifying grin and glowing eyes. "This way," Sam shouted, leading them back to the main tent. They burst through the door, slamming it shut behind them. But the sounds of laughter, high-pitched and inhuman, echoed all around. "They're not stopping," Chloe said, her voice trembling. Tasha clutched the scissors tightly. "We have to do something." "Like what?" Ryan snapped. "This is your fault." Before Tasha could respond, the lights in the big top flickered to life, casting an eerie glow over the ring. In the center stood a figure in a tattered clown costume, its painted face split by an impossibly wide grin. "Welcome, my friends," the clown said, spreading its arms. Its voice was smooth, almost soothing. "You've released my family. For that, I must thank you." "What are you?" Chloe demanded. The clown tilted its head, its smile never wavering. "I am Chuckles, of course, and these are my children." The grotesque figures began to emerge from the shadows surrounding the group. "We didn't mean to," Tasha began, but Chuckles cut her off. "Intentions matter little. You've trespassed on sacred ground and disturbed our eternal rest. Now you'll join us." "Run," Sam yelled, grabbing a metal pole from the ground. The group scattered as the creatures attacked. Sam swung the pole wildly, striking one of the figures in the head. It crumpled, but two more took its place. Ryan grabbed a chair and hurled it at Chuckles, but the clown caught it effortlessly, laughing. "You can't fight us," Chuckles said. "This is our world now." Chloe tripped over a fallen beam, and one of the creatures lunged at her. She screamed as its claws raked her arm, but Tasha stabbed it with the scissors, and it dissolved into ash. "They can be killed," Tasha yelled. But for every creature they destroyed, more balloons floated into the tent, popping and releasing fresh horrors. As the group fought desperately, Sam noticed something strange. The strings from the balloons weren't just hanging, they were connected to the performers' old costumes and props scattered around the room. "They're tied to the circus," he shouted. "What does that mean?" Chloe yelled, dodging another attack. "We have to destroy it." Tasha grabbed a torch from the wall and lit it. "If we burn the tent, maybe it'll stop them." "Do it," Sam yelled. Tasha hesitated, then hurled the torch into the center ring. The flames spread quickly, consuming the tent and everything inside. The creatures screamed and dissolved into ash as the fire roared higher. But as the group ran for the exit, Chuckles appeared in their path. "You think fire can stop me?" he said, his painted face illuminated by the flames. Sam lunged at him with the pole, but Chuckles caught it and twisted it, sending him flying. "This isn't over," Chuckles said, his grin widening. "You'll see me again. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but you'll see me." The group barely made it out as the tent collapsed in a fiery inferno. The next morning, the police found the group huddled by the roadside, covered in soot and blood. "There was a fire," Sam explained shakily. "The circus, it was alive. But when the police searched the grounds, they found nothing but ash." Months later, a new circus arrived in a neighboring town. Its main attraction? A clown named Chuckles, whose painted grin promised endless laughter. Carnival's end. The wind was heavy with the smell of grease and stale popcorn as Jenna walked down the gravel road with her young son, Danny. It was late in the evening, and the only light came from the flickering bulbs strung up above the entrance to the carnival. It was an old-timey affair, with a rusted Ferris wheel creaking in the distance, and the sound of carnival music playing faintly from the speakers, warped and distorted as if echoing through 1,000 miles of tunnels. "You sure this is okay, Mom?" Danny asked, his hand clutching hers tightly. His wide eyes scanned the carnival like a curious animal. Jenna smiled down at him, though her own heart wasn't as calm as she tried to appear. She was a single mother, and every decision she made weighed heavily on her. But this seemed harmless enough. A small, local carnival on the outskirts of town. Nothing to worry about. "Of course, honey," she reassured him. "It's just a carnival. Nothing's going to happen." But there was something about the place that set her nerves on edge. The old, peeling posters on the ticket booth, the creaky rides, and the unsettling silence between the bursts of carnival music gave off a strange, almost surreal aura. They walked up to the ticket booth, where a gaunt man with pale skin and a crooked smile handed them their tickets. "Welcome to the show," he said, his voice a little too cheerful, like it had been rehearsed 1,000 times. "Thanks," Jenna said, clutching the tickets. "Have a good night," she added, trying to smile. The man's eyes lingered on her a moment too long before he nodded and turned away. "Let's get some cotton candy," Jenna said, trying to push aside the odd feeling gnawing at her. Danny, ever the excited boy, grinned. "Yeah, let's go." They wandered from one attraction to the next, indulging in the simple pleasures. A giant spinning ride, a few carnival games where they won cheap prizes, and a brief stop for sugary sweets. But the place wasn't like the bright, bustling carnivals they had visited in the past. It was quieter, almost too quiet. "I want to go see the funhouse," Danny said, pointing eagerly at a crooked, ancient building that loomed in the distance. The distorted mirrors reflected strange, warped images of the night sky. The lights inside flickered, casting eerie shadows on the cracked walls. "Are you sure? It looks a little weird," Jenna said, eyeing the funhouse. But Danny was already tugging at her hand, his excitement contagious. "Please, Mom, I want to see the mirrors." With a sigh, Jenna reluctantly followed him toward the entrance, the air growing colder as they neared the building. Inside, the funhouse was dark and twisted, the walls adorned with cracked mirrors that distorted their reflections into grotesque shapes. Jenna felt her unease grow as she walked deeper into the maze. But Danny was laughing, pointing at his reflection as it stretched and shrunk in the warped glass. "This is so cool," he exclaimed, his laughter echoing through the hollow corridors. Jenna smiled, trying to enjoy the moment, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air felt too thick, the shadows too deep. The laughter of the carnival goers outside seemed distant now, as if it were all just a memory. "Danny," she called, glancing around. "Where are you?" But there was no response. She turned in a slow circle, her eyes scanning the twisted funhouse. The mirrors were distorting everything, warping the layout of the room into a maze that seemed to stretch on forever. She took a step forward, but the room only seemed to shift further, becoming more disorienting. "Danny?" Her voice was more frantic now. She reached for her phone, her hands trembling as she tried to call his name. "Danny, come on, this isn't funny." A low chuckle echoed through the mirrors. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. It wasn't Danny. The sound was too deep, too mocking. The distorted reflections in the mirrors seemed to shift, twisting and reshaping. For a moment, she could have sworn she saw figures moving behind the glass. Clowns with painted smiles, their eyes glowing in the dim light. A cold hand gripped her shoulder. Jenna spun around, but no one was there. Her breath quickened, panic rising as the shadows seemed to close in around her. She was alone. "Danny?" she called, her voice desperate now. Suddenly, she heard a giggle. It was Danny's voice, but it was wrong. Too high-pitched, too hollow. The sound echoed from deep within the mirrors. She stumbled toward the sound, her footsteps echoing through the hall, only to find herself face to face with a large mirror that reflected nothing but the twisted shadows of her own distorted figure. Then, she saw it. Her reflection grinned back at her, but not in the way she did. It was a wide, grotesque grin that stretched impossibly far across her face, and behind it there was a flicker, like something moving in the darkness. She recoiled, her heart hammering in her chest as the reflection shifted, morphing into the image of a clown. A twisted, horrific clown with hollow eyes and a painted smile that stretched from ear to ear. "Mommy?" the reflection said, its voice twisted and wrong. "Come play with us," Jenna screamed, stumbling back as the figure in the mirror reached toward her, its fingers stretching out unnaturally long. She backed away, her pulse pounding in her ears. She had to get out. She had to find Danny. As she ran through the maze of mirrors, the laughter grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't just the mirrors anymore. The laughter seemed to come from all around her, echoing from the walls themselves. "Mommy," a voice whispered from behind her. "Mommy, I'm scared." Jenna spun around, her eyes wide with terror. She thought it was Danny, but when she looked, there was no one there. "Danny?" she called, but her voice trembled. From one of the mirrors ahead, she saw him. He was standing there, his back to her, facing the twisted reflection of a clown. His head was tilted strangely, and his body was rigid, like he was frozen in place. His eyes were wide and vacant. "Danny!" she cried, rushing toward him. But as she neared, something strange happened. His body began to change, his form twisted and warped, his face distorting into a grotesque painted grin. His eyes sunk deeper into his skull, replaced by dark shadows. "Mommy," he whispered again, his voice hollow, unrecognizable. Jenna fell to her knees, reaching out toward him, but he was gone. In his place was the clown, the twisted version of Danny, grinning from ear to ear. "No!" she screamed, tearing at her hair. "No, no, no." The laughter echoed through the mirrors, growing louder, mocking her every step. And then, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the clown, the one from the mirror. It stepped forward, its grin widening with every movement until it was standing directly in front of her. "Playtime's over," the clown whispered, its voice a soft rasp. "You've been such a good little mommy, now it's time to join us." Jenna backed away, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "No, I won't let you take him." But the clown only chuckled, its long fingers reaching for her. "You don't get to choose anymore," it said, its voice like a blade in her mind. The mirrors around her shattered, and she was plunged into darkness. She reached out, her hands grasping at the air, but there was nothing. She was falling into the void. Then, just as suddenly, everything stopped. Jenna gasped, her chest heaving as she opened her eyes. The carnival was gone. There were no mirrors, no twisted clowns. She was back at the entrance, standing in the moonlight, staring at the empty gravel road. "Mom?" Danny's voice echoed behind her. She spun around to find him standing there, looking as he had when they first arrived, innocent, full of life and smiling. But as she ran to him, she saw something terrible in his eyes. His grin, wide and painted. The carnival was still there, hidden beneath the surface of the world, waiting for its next victim. Smile-wide, Jacob Trenton was once the face of joy and laughter. He was Jolly Joe, a beloved clown who could make children laugh with just a wink and a balloon animal. His oversized shoes, round red nose, and painted smile had become synonymous with happiness, and for decades he performed in circuses, at birthday parties, and in parades. But now, In his retirement, the world he once knew seemed like a distant memory. Time had been unkind, leaving him with a twisted smile that no longer brought joy, but terror. The small, dilapidated house he called home was far from the laughter-filled places he once performed in. The walls were adorned with faded photographs of his glory days, clowning in packed arenas, laughing with children, and receiving accolades from fellow performers. But now, as Jacob sat in the corner of his dimly lit living room, the photos only served as a painful reminder of the past. He had retired years ago, but the clown didn't leave him. It haunted him, whispering in the shadows. The voices were the worst part. Jacob had always been a solitary man, preferring the quiet when he wasn't performing. But now, there was no silence. No peace. It was as if the laughter that had once defined him had become his prison. The voices taunted him constantly, clawing at his mind. "You can't escape us," they whispered. "You are ours." Every night, they grew louder. They began to take form, becoming something more than just whispers in his head. They had names. The voices were from the spirits of ancient tricksters who had never left him. The voices claimed they had cursed him with their presence long ago. It wasn't just the spirit of any clown. No, it was the spirit of an ancient trickster who had played cruel games with the world for centuries. Jacob had never believed in the supernatural. He had always chalked up the strange occurrences in his life to the pressure of being a performer. The long hours, the constant need for perfection, the demands of an audience. It was all enough to make anyone feel like they were losing their mind. But these voices were different. They were insidious and relentless. They whispered things that no human mind could ever conceive, and with each passing day, Jacob felt himself slipping further into madness. His hands shook uncontrollably as he worked on his latest project, another clown doll. The dolls were lifelike, far too real for comfort. Jacob had spent countless hours sculpting and painting their faces, carefully sewing their costumes and stuffing them with material that made them feel disturbingly human. He was obsessed with creating them, and each doll was an extension of his madness. It was as though he was trying to trap the spirits within the dolls, to give them a form they could inhabit forever. He believed that by making the dolls, he could appease the voices, perhaps even make them go away. But the more he made, the worse things became. His former apprentice, a young clown named Timmy, had visited the house a few times over the past year, but he hadn't seen Jacob in several months. Timmy had been concerned when he heard the rumors that Jacob had become a recluse, holed up in his house, creating these strange dolls. It didn't help that some of the local children had reported seeing strange figures lurking in the windows at night, figures with wide smiles and painted faces. They said they looked like clowns, but they weren't quite right. When Timmy knocked on the door that night, he didn't know what to expect. The place was eerily quiet. He had heard Jacob's voice calling to him from within, low and guttural, like someone in the depths of madness. Timmy hesitated, then pushed the door open. "Jacob?" he called softly, stepping inside. "It's me, Timmy." The house was dark, the air heavy with the smell of must and decay. Old circus memorabilia was scattered throughout the living room, with broken toys and costumes in disarray. The dolls were everywhere, on the shelves, on the floor, some of them sitting on the furniture, their glass eyes fixed in a permanent stare. Timmy stepped further into the room, his heart pounding. "Jacob?" he called again, more firmly this time. He heard a faint scraping noise from the back of the house, followed by the sound of soft giggling. "Jacob, where are you?" Suddenly from the shadows, a figure emerged. It was Jacob, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes wide with delirium. His once vibrant red nose and painted smile were faded and cracked, giving him a terrifying, otherworldly appearance. "Timmy," Jacob whispered, his voice hoarse, "you're just in time." His eyes glistened with madness. "The dolls, they want to meet you." Timmy felt a shiver run down his spine. He had heard rumors about Jacob's mental state, but nothing prepared him for this. Jacob's once warm presence was now a hollow shell, consumed by something dark and sinister. "Jacob, you need help," Timmy said, trying to keep his voice steady. "These dolls, they're not healthy. You've got to stop making them." Jacob's lips twitched into a crooked smile. "They're not dolls, Timmy. They're my masterpieces, my children." His hand trembled as he gestured toward the figures surrounding them. "They're not like the others. These are special." Timmy took a cautious step back, his gaze flicking nervously from one doll to another. Each one seemed to stare at him with an intensity that sent a chill through his bones. "Jacob, what happened?" Timmy asked. "These dolls, they're alive, aren't they?" Jacob's eyes narrowed, his expression shifting to one of twisted amusement. "Alive?" he chuckled softly. "They're more than alive. They're vessels for the spirits that haunt me." The dolls seemed to twitch as if they had heard the conversation. Timmy's heart pounded in his chest as he glanced from one to the other, the grotesque figures moving ever so slightly, as if waiting for something. A whispering breeze swept through the room, and Timmy shivered. "What spirits, Jacob?" Timmy asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Jacob stepped closer to him, his eyes wild. "The spirits of the ancient tricksters. The ones who cursed me. The ones who live in the dolls, inside their painted smiles." Timmy's blood ran cold as he looked at the dolls again. The figures were eerily human, with eyes that seemed to follow his every move. The smiles on their faces were grotesque, too wide, too perfect, too lifelike. "I don't understand," Timmy whispered, shaking his head. "What do they want with you?" Jacob's voice lowered to a hoarse murmur. "They don't want anything, Timmy. They want everything. They want to take me. And you." The giggling sound returned, louder this time, echoing through the room, as though the walls themselves were laughing. "Jacob, what have you done?" Timmy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The older clown smiled, his lips curling into a grotesque grin. "I've made them real. I've given them form." Suddenly, Timmy felt something brush against his leg. He looked down, his eyes widening in horror as a small, disembodied hand, a doll's hand, reached up from the floor, its fingers curling into his pant leg. "Get off me!" Timmy shouted, stumbling back, but it was too late. The other dolls began to move, their heads jerking unnaturally in his direction, their painted faces contorting in menacing grins. Jacob was laughing now, a manic, distorted laugh that echoed off the walls. The dolls were alive, their tiny bodies moving with purpose. One of them, a small girl doll with blood-red cheeks, crawled toward Timmy, its mouth opening impossibly wide, revealing rows of tiny, sharp teeth. "Please," Timmy begged, his back hitting the wall as the dolls closed in on him. "Jacob, please stop. They're gonna kill me." But Jacob only laughed louder, his eyes glinting with madness. "You'll be perfect, Timmy," he said, his voice slurring. "You'll be my masterpiece, the final doll." With a sudden violent motion, Jacob lunged at Timmy, his bony hands gripping the young clown's neck, squeezing tighter and tighter. Timmy fought back, his hands trembling as he tried to pry Jacob's hands from his throat, but it was no use. The strength in Jacob's grip was unrelenting. As Timmy's vision blurred, he could hear the laughter of the dolls, high-pitched and eerie, as they swarmed around him. They climbed up his legs, their tiny porcelain fingers digging into his flesh, as their painted smiles widened with cruel delight. And then, in the silence that followed, there was only one thing left. The grotesque, lifelike smile on Timmy's face, frozen forever in the cruelest of grins. Jacob stepped back, breathing heavily, his eyes filled with an unsettling sense of triumph. He had created his masterpiece. Crimson laughter. The small town of Glenwood had always been a quiet, peaceful place. Nestled between dense forests and rolling hills, it was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else, and where the most exciting event of the year was the annual Harvest Festival. The townspeople looked forward to it with great anticipation, a chance to come together, celebrate the fruits of their labor, and share in the simple joys of life. This year, however, things would be different. The town's mayor, Henry Donovan, had come up with a new idea to make the festival even more special. He had hired a professional clown, a performer with a reputation for making the dullest of crowds laugh until they cried. The clown, who went by the name of Harlequin, was known far and wide for his unique brand of humor. His laughter, some claimed, was so contagious that it could lift the spirits of even the most cynical of people. But the townspeople had no idea what they were in for. The day of the festival arrived, and the streets of Glenwood were alive with the sounds of chatter, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. The smell of roasting meat and fresh pies filled the air as families set up their booths and prepared for the evening's festivities. Children ran through the streets with brightly colored balloons, their faces painted with cheerful designs, while the adults caught up with old friends and neighbors. At the heart of the festival was the grand stage, where Harlequin was set to perform. The excitement in the air was palpable, and the crowd eagerly awaited the clown's arrival. No one could have predicted the horrors that would unfold that evening. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the town in a dusky glow, Harlequin made his entrance. He was dressed in the traditional garb of a circus clown. A bright red wig, a white painted face with exaggerated features, and a costume adorned with multicolored ruffles. His smile was wide, almost unnaturally so, and his eyes twinkled with a strange, unsettling energy. The crowd cheered, and Harlequin took a bow, his laughter ringing out like the tinkling of a bell. It was a high-pitched, almost melodic sound that sent shivers down the spines of the townspeople. But they laughed too, as they always did when they heard it, oblivious to the dark undercurrent lurking beneath his performance. At first, everything seemed normal. Harlequin cracked jokes, pulled balloons from his sleeves, and performed a series of slapstick routines that had the audience rolling in the aisles with laughter. But as the evening wore on, something strange began to happen. The laughter of the crowd started to take on a different quality. It became more frantic, more desperate, as though the people were losing control of their own emotions. At first, it was subtle. A woman in the front row began to laugh uncontrollably, her face turning red as tears streamed down her cheeks. Then a man nearby started to twitch, his hand gripping his stomach as though in pain. Others began to shift uncomfortably in their seats, their expressions contorting into strange, unnatural grins. But it didn't stop there. As Harlequin's laughter echoed through the crowd, a strange sense of hysteria seemed to settle over the town. People began to twitch and convulse, their bodies jerking in unnatural movements. The laughter that had once been light-hearted and carefree now had a manic edge to it, as if the very sound was poisoning their minds. It wasn't long before the first incident occurred. A man in the crowd suddenly stood up, his eyes wide with fear, and screamed. His hands went to his face, tearing at his own skin as though trying to remove something beneath it. His screams turned into laughter, but it was a twisted, agonizing sound, full of pain and terror. The crowd watched in horror as the man clawed at his own face, his fingers tearing through the flesh until his face was nothing but a bloody mess. And still, he laughed. Another man ran to the stage, his eyes glazed over, his mouth contorted into a grotesque grin. Without a word, he grabbed a nearby chair and swung it at Harlequin, striking the clown across the chest. But Harlequin didn't flinch. He simply laughed, his eyes never leaving the man's face, his grin widening. Chaos erupted in the crowd. People began to turn on each other, their laughter growing louder and more frenzied with each passing second. A woman picked up a knife from a nearby vendor's booth and stabbed a man in the stomach, her face contorted in a rictus of glee. Another person grabbed a broken bottle and started slashing at anyone within reach. The sound of the crowd's hysterical laughter mixed with the screams and the sickening sound of flesh being torn apart. As the chaos unfolded, a few survivors managed to flee the scene, their minds racing with terror. Among them was Emily, a young woman who had been standing near the front of the crowd when the madness began. She had seen the bloodshed, heard the screams, but it wasn't the violence that terrified her the most. It was the laughter. It was everywhere. It was inside her head. It was all she could hear. She ran through the streets, desperate to escape the nightmare that had overtaken the town. But the laughter followed her. It echoed through the alleys, bouncing off the walls, getting louder and louder, until it seemed to be coming from every direction. It was no longer just Harlequin's laughter. It was the laughter of the entire town, distorted and maddened. Emily didn't know where she was going. She just ran, not knowing if she was being pursued or if it was just the sound in her mind. She finally stumbled into a small dark alleyway and collapsed against the brick wall, gasping for breath. But the laughter didn't stop. It never stopped. She could feel it creeping into her thoughts, twisting her perception of reality. The world around her began to warp, the shadows growing longer, the air growing thicker. She could hear whispers in the laughter, words she couldn't quite make out. And then, through the haze of hysteria, she heard a voice, a low, guttural voice, dripping with malice. "Do you hear it, Emily?" it said, its words vibrating in her skull. "The laughter is inside you now. You can't escape it. You're part of it. It's too late." Emily's heart raced. She turned around, looking for the source of the voice, but saw nothing. The alleyway was empty. "No," she whispered to herself, "this isn't real. It's just the laughter." But she knew deep down that it wasn't just the laughter. It was something worse. Something ancient. The laughter, she realized, was a curse. It wasn't just a sound. It was a force, an entity that had taken root in the town. And once it had been unleashed, it could never be stopped. Emily's mind raced as the laughter continued to echo in her ears, growing louder, more frantic. She covered her ears, trying to block it out, but it was no use. The laughter had taken hold of her, just as it had taken hold of everyone else in the town. And then, the horror struck. Her body began to twitch uncontrollably. Her hands went to her face, and she felt the corners of her mouth begin to stretch into an unnatural grin. She couldn't stop it. It was as though the laughter was controlling her, forcing her to become part of the madness. The smile on her face widened until it felt as though her skin would tear from the sheer force of it. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when she felt the first ripple of the laughter in her chest. It was a deep, hollow sound, like something trapped inside her, waiting to burst free. She could feel it spreading through her veins, through her heart, infecting every part of her being. And then, she laughed. It was a terrible, soul-rending laugh, full of madness and pain. It wasn't her laugh, it was the town's laugh. The cursed, endless laughter that would never stop. And as Emily's vision blurred and the laughter consumed her, she realized the terrible truth. There would be no escape. No one was left untouched. Glenwood had become a town of madness, its very soul consumed by the curse of the crimson laughter. And it would never end. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to subscribe for more chilling stories. And remember, be careful. I'll be watching you.